It's been almost 2 years since my last video, and it's fair to say a lot has happened. This was the first clip of what was to become Digi-Gears, taken from back in late August 2023. Well, fast forward almost 2 years later, and here we are in June 2025, after countless lines of code, and I mean, it's a lot.
It's big.
An anxiety attack or two.
Doctor, you're wanted on the phone.
A laptop resurrection.
I'm not ready for this!
Add to the mix a demanding full-time job and just me doing game dev wrong in general, my first game, Digi-Gears, is finally ready to wishlist on Steam. So go ahead and check it out. Now, for those of you who have been following my previous devlog series for Galactic Mercenaries, you might be wondering what happened. And ultimately, I made the decision to work on a different game idea. Without going into too much detail, I parked that project for 3 crucially important reasons. And that's passion, lack of experience making an RTS game. It was going to be my first, and let's face it, learning on the job to try make a Steam game, well,
not a great plan.
And finally, the hook. And no, I don't mean the hook from Captain Hook, or that Peter Pan film, or also that dude from I Know What You Did Last Summer, but rather the unique hook that keeps you playing the game. I do plan to come back to this game in the future, but for now I had a game idea that really ticked all 3 boxes which I mentioned. So in August 2023, I hit the reset button.
Don't do it!
And that's when I started on Digi-Gears. The inspiration for Digi-Gears came from a number of different places. In short, I took inspiration from the Pokemon franchise as well as the TCG game, in particular the Game Boy Color game, which has been long forgotten. And you may have seen I did a remake for that game on the channel as well. The voxel art style decision came from when I was doing the MGS remake. I really thought it'd be cool to make a fully fledged game in that voxel art style. And a small portion of you who are subscribed to the channel may have figured that out already. On that note, do subscribe and hit the notification bell to follow the development of Digi-Gears. And another noteworthy mention for the inspiration for Digi-Gears is actually Pogs. Like many other 90s kids, it formed part of my childhood, but I always wondered what if the game had more depth to it, with Pogs having different attacks and defense stats, as well as abilities. Also, what if different designs came out of the Pogs for combat? The outcome of this whole ideation process was Digi-Gears. Once I knew what game I wanted to make, and having the learnings from my previous projects, I was a lot more focused in my approach. At least that's what I told myself during my anxiety attacks throughout development. From a game design perspective, at its core, the gameplay loop is this. The player would go from point A to point B, and would encounter and duel various duelists, with the reward being a parcel or a pack of Digi-Gears. That's a very simplified version of the gameplay loop. From a mechanics and level design point of view, I needed to set up the player, duelists who the player would battle, the duel system itself, and a way to manage all the Digi-Gears, plus the decks, not to forget all the different towns and cities for the player to venture across. Easy, right? That's totally no problem at all. First thing I did was build Bushy Town, which is the hometown of the player and where the game will start off. Now, originally I had the idea to have the whole game just be blocks made with magical voxel. But that made it very difficult for me, given I also made a game design choice to have the region be this vast area of mountains that surround all of the different towns, cities, as well as tunnels and some cliffs with beaches beneath them. So I ended up reiterating several times before I came to the decision to incorporate the terrain tool, so it's now a 3D voxel-ish game. Oh, and I also added pixel art for the textures, but I like how it turned out, and I feel the smooth mesh with pixel textures complements the other blocky voxel meshes. For instance, I feel like these trees and this dirt road leading out of Bushy Town complement each other very well. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Once I built the foundation of Bushy Town, the first thing I did next was make the player using magical voxel, and give him multiple meshes for his different movement and idle stances. Currently he has the walk, run, and idle stance. For movement itself, I set up a mesh loop system that, well, loops through all the different meshes depending on whether the player is stationary or in motion. I also plan to give the player different vehicles as forms of transport. Currently I'm working on a bike for the player because I think it looks really cool in a voxel 3D format. I'm very keen to know what you all think though. Feel free to suggest some ideas in the comments and I can pick the best one to be added into the game. I was also thinking about an electric scooter, as that would be something different. As you can see from the roads I'm adding into the game, I was also seriously considering adding a car. Like for example, the player gets a driver's license or something along those lines and he has to complete a minigame to get that license. I'm still in the early stages of exploring these ideas though, so do let me know what you think. Now let's move on to the juicy center of the game, and that is the gameplay. My goal with this game is to create a duel-like experience with decks and turn-based combat. However, I always wanted to experience this in a way where the player can also go on an adventure in an open 3D world and challenge other duelists while improving his decks. So that's what I decided to do. and it was not easy at all. The structure I had in mind was inspired by the original Pokemon TCG which I mentioned earlier, but if you recall there's a point where you flip a coin to determine who will go first, the player or the opponent. I took that concept and had the idea to add a board that flips open once the coin lands to really give it that 3D look and feel. For me this really gives the game its own personality. Each duel is played on a 6-slot board, 2 attack slots, 3 defense and 1 special slot. Why? Because strategy is the key focus for this game. Each player can have up to 6 Digi-Gears in play at any point in time. The symbols shown on each of the 6 positions play a particular role in the game. Each Digi-Gear has an attack power and a defensive power. Playing the Digi-Gear in the attack position will mean its attack power will also act as its health, and playing a Digi-Gear in the defense position means the opposite, its defense will act as its health. I wanted to add this in because from a game design perspective, this idea really makes you think about what Digi-Gears you play in either attack or defense, playing to their respective strengths. The Digiwatch has a dual role. It tracks the player's wins and losses outside of duels, but acts as their health in the duel with a hologram of a mechanical heart that spawns out of each watch. The one other special position which I mentioned earlier is where each player can play one legendary Digi-Gear, which can have either its defense or attack act as its health, whichever is higher. I also plan to give these Digi-Gears higher attack and defense or more unique abilities, and in general I do plan on adding special abilities for the Digi-Gears. One I already have implemented is a double attack. So some Digi-Gears like Wobbloon and Mr. Punchy can do natural double attacks like a 1-2 punch. By the way, I gotta rethink that name because this clown apparently already has it. Like what? Which one looks more like a Mr. Punchy? Each player also starts off with 40,000 energy points. The first to hit 0 loses. When a Digi-Gear is attacked, if the attack power is higher than its health, being either its defense or attack as we mentioned earlier based on the position that they're played in, it will be destroyed and sent to the bin. Additionally, the defensive positions play a big role. If there are no defenders in play, the opponent can attack your energy points directly, which are represented by the hologram of the mechanical heart I mentioned earlier. So you could in theory have both attackers in play but no defensive Digi-Gears. That means you can be attacked directly. The legendary is exempt from this rule however. If you have a legendary in play, it has to be defeated before you can attack the other opponent's life points. Now you may have noticed, but aside from Digi-Gears, you're also able to play tools and equipment. Equipment are basically buffs you can add to your Digi-Gears, for example, to increase their attack or their defense. Tools, on the other hand, are more strategic. For example, you can play the Trojan tool, which disables a Digi-Gear. The equipment gear can only be used once and is sent to the bin when it's used. The tool, however, is played and stays in play until it's destroyed. And finally, in order to play a Digi-Gear, you do need to charge the board with amps. These gears are orange in colour. The logic is that every Digi-Gear character will have a certain number of amps required before it can be played. Early on I made a choice to make as much of the UI in the game to reduce clutter on the screen. As it stands, the UI on the board displays both the total health or energy points of the player and opponent, as well as the total amps charged. I will of course be gathering feedback and iterating based on how people find it, so do let me know in the comments below what you think. And those are the core rules of Digi-Gears. Now I do have some ideas which I'd like to add as I move forward with the game, such as adding environmental effects to the board. This was a cool idea which existed in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Animated series from my childhood. I'm not sure if it exists in the actual card game as I never kept too much track of it, but to take advantage of the 3D open world I thought it'd be really cool to use the environment to give different Digi-Gears with the same type an environmental boost. Without getting into too much detail on how the duel system works under the hood,
Pop the hood.
Pop the hood?
I basically have one script which manages everything for the player. Things like shuffling the player's deck and tracking which Digi-Gears are in play or in our hand. I have a similar script for the opponent that does the same logic. I kept these separate for simplicity as the logic expands out. For the Digi-Gears themselves, each Digi-Gear has a Digi-Stat script, which holds the details like attack, defense, amps required to play, and which voxel models to spawn in. And for those of you who are wondering why I didn't just use scriptable objects, I don't really have an answer. I was too indecisive and I'd gone too far. I may convert these into scriptable objects in the future, said every game developer ever. Each Digi-Gear has loops for the idle mesh, but then we have single triggered meshes for things like attacking and when the Digi-Gear spawns onto the board when it's played. Some other worthy mentions are a shake script for when either the Digi-Gear or health is hit to give off a slight, shake effect. I've also created the foundation for a highlight script that basically sets active a UI panel and feeds the Digi-Gear details to that UI panel so that the player can get a quick view of the stats before they decide on playing a Digi-Gear or decide on attacking with it. Now this is without even mentioning all the other logic I've implemented like managing the attacks and the use of tools and equipment, but I don't want to bore everyone to death here. When it came to modeling the Digi-Gears, I have to say it was both fun but also exhausting. I used Magical Voxel to make all the Digi-Gears. As I mentioned earlier, each Digi-Gear has 3 different states, and that is the attack state, the idle state, and the spawn state. Now this was definitely one of the hardest parts of developing from a modeling perspective, but it was also one of the most rewarding. Reason being, it took me at a minimum a couple of days to get one Digi-Gear fully completed, and I mean getting all of the different idle meshes, attack meshes, and spawn meshes set up. To add a bit more complexity to the mix, I decided very early on that I wanted to have this sort of stacking effect for when the Digi-Gears spawn in, but that would mean I needed multiple meshes of the same mesh broken down. I decided to break down the voxel meshes into blocks of 3, because this ultimately produced the best results for the spawn effect. I have to say this was the part I loved the most in my game development process. It really sparked my creativity and gave me the freedom to think of, well, what are some other cool creatures that I could build for this game? And here are just a few. Now there's a lot more to it than just the creature models themselves. There was also the actual Digi-Gear that you play onto the board, and I did originally make this in Magicka Voxel, but it was heavy on the number of polygons. And in order to keep this performant without having to do the topology and redesign them in a lower level of detail, I decided to make them in Blender. And yes, I did use a cheat code here because it was supposed to be all originally in a voxel format, but, you know. Shit happens. Thank you, Predator. Couldn't have said it better myself. I can revisit this whole topic of building the Digi-Gears in a separate video because there's a lot to talk about, but as it stands, I have 10 fully modeled Digi-Gears, from the creatures themselves to all of the different meshes to all of the actual Digi-Gears that you play onto the board. Outside of that though, I have another 20 or so Digi-Gears that I have to add to the build of the game. Okay, so by the end of this long process, I had the basic foundation done for the duel system. The next challenge was integrating this seamlessly between open world gameplay and the duel scene. I'm also conscious that there's still a lot I haven't taken you through, like how I set up the case the player will use for managing their deck, items, and saving the game. But this video is getting long already, so do subscribe to get notified on the next devlog. Reflecting back on the development cycle so far, although it's not been easy and I've definitely experienced some ups and downs, I can reaffirm that passion for a particular game idea or a project goes a long way in keeping you excited as you progress through the game development lifecycle. When you hit brick walls, yes, you still get frustrated, but that motivation to bring your game to fruition drives you to solve the problem. And remember, every problem, no matter what it is, has a solution. You know, while you're still living and breathing. What's funny, however, is the infamous scope creep definitely made his way into my mind and naturally as output in my game. It's funny because keeping the scope small made up one of the reasons I switched projects in the first place. But I don't mind it as much because I really do enjoy and have a passion for bringing Digi-Gears onto the gaming market. And I have learned to scale back certain parts, but I'm also conscious that I don't have all the pieces of the puzzle yet. And that's a good thing for where I am in development. I've accepted that this game could change for the better as I get your valuable input and feedback throughout this cycle, but also post-demo launch, which is actually what I'm working towards currently. So that's what I've been doing this past year and 9 months. And although I haven't come to a full release of the game yet, there was something unexpectedly powerful about finalizing my Steam wishlist page and pressing that shiny publish button. It wasn't just a click, it felt like a wave of progress and excitement, reminding me why I started this journey in the first place and pushing me to keep going. That's all I have for this video. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to watch this. It means a lot. Let me know what you think of Digi-Gears and feel free to subscribe to follow my journey. As always, drink some coffee, code, and I will catch you in the next one.